We are physical beings in a physical universe that follows physical laws. There are truths to be discovered about how our actions benefit us and how our actions harm us. This is simply true. We don't need another mind. This is about the interaction of minds, but we don't need some transcendent mind to dictate what is true. We discover what is true about the reality that we inhabit. Everything that makes me, me, everything that we have historically and religiously attributed to a soul that can be identified with a place has a place in the brain. My personality is in my brain.
You both think or believe will happen after you die?
I imagine my wife will get married to somebody else, and actually, she's going to run off with a friend of hers and have a whole bunch of cats. Oh, you mean what's going to happen to me? I don't know. I don't see any reason to think that anything's going to happen to me. Everything that makes me, me, everything that we have historically and religiously attributed to a soul that can be identified with a place has a place in the brain. My personality is in my brain. We know from experiments on people who have suffered all sorts of brain damage that you can reset people's personality, their preference, their memories, their ability to make new memories. I'm going to get the name wrong. Vishwanathan, somebody will know. Anyway, did a talk at one of the religion summits about a split brain patient, hemispherectomy. They can communicate with both halves, and each half has a separate personality and a separate identity and communicates independently. One half, Christian. The other half, atheist. Now, I guess you could argue that when we split that brain in half, there was only enough soul for one side, and the other side just got, shafted. But everything we know about what makes us us, our likes, our preferences, our desires, they're all a product of the brain. Now, a lot of theists would say that there's a soul behind it all, as a puppet master, the ghost in the machine. And yet there's no evidence to support this. And it doesn't make sense in the model. If I suffer severe brain damage and all of a sudden I don't remember the past, I don't remember that I love my wife, I don't like the same foods, I don't want to interact with the same people, and now all of a sudden I believe in God, am I the same person? I don't think so. Haven't we really kind of ended up with a whole new person? I have an argument that I use partially as a joke. It's an argument that demonstrates, according to some traditions, nobody's in heaven. And it's really easy. In heaven, there's no suffering and no sadness, according to some traditions. My mom is convinced she's going to heaven. She's convinced I'm going to hell. I don't know who's going to end up in heaven, but it won't be my mom. There's no way my mom could be up in heaven, not suffering and not sad that her son is in hell. And if God does some kind of magic to take that out of her, it's not my mom anymore. It's a facsimile of my mom. Some kind of robotic worshiping thing that's not my mom. My mom and I disagree vehemently on religious stuff, so much so we don't talk about it anymore because we love each other. We'd like to have a civil, Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever religious holiday drives me up there to visit and hang out. By the way, we celebrate Christmas, have a big white tree with peppermints and stuff on it. It's awesome. Entirely secular stuff. We're stealing it back because Christianity stole most of those things from other religions. And Easter too, but I'm not that big on eggs and candy because I'm diabetic. But everything that we know about us takes place in our brain. The brain gets damaged. Are you the same person? I don't know. The math on souls is confusing. Sam Harris has talked about the math on souls for people who believe that zygotes get a soul because the embryo will sometimes split and then we get together. So when it splits, does it have two souls? And then when it comes back together, does it just have one? Or now do we have a body with two souls? Or did we not put a soul in until afterwards? Or does it happen when he breathes his first breath, as the Jews believed? It doesn't make any sense. The math on souls doesn't make sense. The science on souls doesn't make any sense. There's no reason to think that there's some kind of ghost dictating what goes on in my brain. We haven't even gotten into free will. Cliff keeps asserting that we have it. I'm not convinced we do, at least not in the sense that he's talking about. I don't know what's going to happen to me when I'm dead. I'm pretty sure my body's going to rot, my brain's going to stop working, and I will cease to exist. And it didn't bother me before I was alive, so I don't see why it'd bother me afterwards.
When Matt says everything we are, our thoughts, memories, personality, comes from the brain, he's not just guessing. We have real evidence for that. Brain scans show that damage to specific areas can completely change how a person behaves. People with strokes or brain injuries sometimes lose their ability to recognize loved ones, form memories, or even control their emotions. There's also the famous case of split brain patients. When the brain is divided, each half can act like its own person, sometimes with completely different beliefs. If a soul were running the show, how does that even make sense? Matt brings up a good point about heaven, too. If someone you love goes to hell, but you're not sad in heaven, are you really you anymore? It sounds more like a version of you with your emotions turned off. That's not comforting. It's unsettling. And scientifically, we've never found any evidence of a soul. No energy, no signal, no mechanism. It's all based on belief, not observation. Now, let's hear what Cliff has to say about this.
Guys, we got to be honest with each other. If there is no God, we know exactly what happens when we die. If there is no God, there's no life after death. If there is no God, you are matter and energy. And when you die, the matter and energy fall apart. So let's not act like maybe there's life after death. No, that's illogical. If there is no God, when you die, when I die, we become fertilizer. Very logical, very reasonable. But you know what the problem is? The problem is that I've got to do funerals for families that are atheist or agnostic. Inevitably, what happens to me is I'm standing there and they're coming up to me saying, well, you know, maybe, the Great Spirit. Excuse me? Great Spirit? What are you talking about? If there is no God, there's no spirit. There's matter and energy. And when we die, the matter and energy falls apart. Now, don't get scared. Just face reality. Be objective. And don't allow your fears to get you knocking your knees saying, oh, well, maybe. Oh, well, possibly. No. Be rational. Use your good mind. If there is no God, when you die, you rot. When I die, I rot. End of story. Just think about it. Now, there's an alternative to that. And the alternative is that if there's a supernatural God, then possibly there is life after death. And I can promise you, I would never believe there's life after death because I'm scared to die. That's being a wimp. That's being a coward. Instead, you'd better use your brain, and you better start thinking, and you better figure out, does the evidence point to there being something more to reality than matter and energy, there being some type of God, or does there not? And then secondly, you better use your brain, and you better think real clearly. Does the historical evidence point to Jesus having died and risen from the dead or not? And I can promise you, if you believe there's life after death because you're scared to die, you're an intellectual wimp. And I would never believe there's life after death because I find it attractive. And Matt is wrong. I don't believe there's life after death because I've got this deep longing for life after death. But I'll tell you exactly what I do. If I find that I have a deep longing for something, I look at the evidence to find out, is there any truth to it or not? And if there's no truth to it, I drop it. But if there is evidence to support it, I would be very wise to follow that evidence. Now, why do I believe there's life after death? First of all, because the evidence is there is a supernatural God. And second of all, because the historical evidence is that Jesus was dead, and 3 days later, he rose from the dead. And the people who saw him risen from the dead died not for belief. They died for what they claimed to have seen, the dead Christ risen from the dead. If you claim to have seen something like Matthew, Mark, John, Thomas, Philip, Andrew, Peter, if you claim to have seen the dead Christ risen from the dead, and then you stand before Roman soldiers, and the Roman soldiers say Caesar is Lord and live, or else maintain that your Jesus is risen from the dead, and we will execute you for it. And if you stand there and say, I'm sorry, I've seen Jesus risen from the dead, that gives your claim tremendous credibility. So the evidence is Jesus rose from the dead. That's why I'm convinced when he promises you eternal life, if you trust in him, he ain't blowing smoke. he's speaking the truth.
Cliff says if there's no God, we just rot. That part is true. What he gets wrong is assuming that's a problem. Just because the idea of death is uncomfortable doesn't make something else magically true. That's not evidence. That's wishful thinking. He also says people died for what they saw, as if martyrdom proves truth. But people die for all kinds of beliefs. Muslims, Hindus, even cult members like Heaven's Gate. Dying for something doesn't prove it's real. It just shows how strongly someone believed it. Cliff brings up Jesus' resurrection like it's a historical fact, but we don't have first-hand evidence. The Gospels were written decades later, anonymously, and contradict each other in key details. That's not strong historical data. It's hearsay. Hitchens was right to say, what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And so far, Cliff hasn't given any evidence, just emotional appeals and stories written down 2,000 years ago. Let's hear Matt one more time.
One is this continued objection to, without God, there's no ultimate meaning. There's no real purpose. Well, I don't know what you mean by real purpose. That seems kind of cheaty. But as far as ultimate meaning, yes, I agree. No ultimate meaning in the existential sense that you're talking about it. And it doesn't matter one bit. The car that I've got out there parked in the parking lot I've had for a couple of years, one of these days it's going to rot away. Does that mean it's not valuable now? Does that mean it doesn't have any value to me now? Does it mean there's no purpose? Should I just go ahead and chuck it now? Let's get rid of it. Eventually it's going to be useless. That's absurd. We all recognize that things have meaning and purpose right now because they are valuable to us. These are properties that we imbue things with and we imbue people with. Do I matter as much to you as your spouse? Bet you I don't, unless it's you. This idea that without the ultimate meaning, or if something is ultimately meaningless, doesn't mean it is always meaningless, or it doesn't mean it's meaningless in every way. This idea about morality, that it's all relative. Actually, I'm a staunch defender of absolute morality. And despite Cliff's straw man, I'm not saying that slavery is immoral because I said so. It might surprise some people to know that while I don't think there's intrinsic value, I think that there is value in people, and that's the value that we imbue them with. This idea that because I said so is the basis for secular morality is flatly absurd. It's the exact opposite of what I just finished talking about how you go through and you build up this system. We are physical beings in a physical universe that follows physical laws. There are truths to be discovered about how our actions benefit us and how our actions harm us. This is simply true. We don't need another mind. This is about the interaction of minds, but we don't need some transcendent mind to dictate what is true. We discover what is true about the reality that we inhabit. God or not, soul or not, we can choose everything on the list that Cliff just talked about being good to each other and building a productive society and caring and loving and trying to end poverty, trying to end oppression, and trying to build a better society. We can do all of that just because it's the right thing to do. There's no evidence for a soul. In fact, there's good evidence against it. There's no evidence or not enough evidence of the various God claims that are out there, or not any particularly good evidence, at least that I've been made aware of. But I could be wrong. And tomorrow, I could find out that there is a God and that I do have a soul. And it wouldn't change very much for me as far as how I end up living my life, because I've already come to good reasons to do things. I'm open to being corrected on them, but what's going to correct me is reason and evidence, not appealing to a God. And if people ask me, well, what are you going to do if you die and you end up standing before God? Hey, I tried. I used my brain. I followed the evidence where it was. And by the way, if your character is actually accurately depicted in the Bible or the Quran, I don't want nothing to do with you. I'm already morally superior to you. I already care more about people than you do. I know. I've never sanctioned slavery, never sanctioned genocide. Gods have. Do all religions lead to the same God? I don't know. I think it's unlikely. I think they clearly all define God differently. I think you could go right down into the same church on the same pew and get two different people, and they're going to define God differently, and they're going to have different views of God. I think there's as many different religions as there are people trying to practice them. And my concern isn't whether or not they all lead to the same God. It's what kind of world do they end up creating? Because why should I care about an afterlife that I don't know whether or not it exists when I've got a life that I know that I have, and I'd like to make it better? And if your religion is impeding on the ability of people who don't practice your religion, or those who do, from living the best life they can right now, then your religion's a problem. That goes for Islam and Christianity and Scientology and Hinduism and everything. If you're advocating something that is detracting from the good of this world, you're part of the problem.
Does being an atheist require the same faith that believing in God does?
No, seriously. It doesn't require any faith to not believe something. It doesn't. Now, if atheism was this assertion that there are no gods, ooh, I pissed some people off. If atheism was this assertion that there are no gods, well, then, yes, you might be able to make a case that that was based on faith, or maybe it's not. It would depend on what the basis, what the foundation for that particular belief was. But atheism, in the weak atheism sense of I do not believe this, doesn't require faith. I don't believe there's a Bigfoot. That's not a faith. It's not a faith-based position. I'm not asserting certainty that there isn't a Bigfoot. I'm just not yet convinced. The Bigfoot claim hasn't met its burden of proof, neither of alien abductions, which, by the way, I'll point out, you can actually go talk to real living people right now who will tell you their alien abduction story. Living, breathing people, you can talk to them. They will have stories that are similar in detail. In some cases, there are multiple people who have supposedly experienced this together. In some cases, the things that people have seen have been entire small towns. And you can interview these people. How many people think that they're actually being abducted by aliens? Not me. That's people you can talk to right now. Somebody writes a couple books, in a couple thousand years, somebody could stand up and say, hey, look, I wouldn't believe it, but look at all of these accounts. These are firsthand people. They were interviewed by the news. We have a much better record of what was happening at the end of the 20th and beginning of 21st century than we do about what happened back when Jesus was supposedly alive, or back around the time that Hinduism was being formed. This is a real record. We even have video footage of people talking about how they came down. And then they'll start tying it together in an intricate little web, the same way conspiracy theorists do right now. Oh, there were lizard people in the government or crop circles out there. We don't believe any of that, I hope. I am at Texas State. I kind of respect you guys because I don't care about colleges, so we're not in any rivalry. UT. But we don't believe that. Why should we? And yet we're expected to believe what is potentially a more extraordinary claim and weaker evidence. There's nothing particularly extraordinary about a universe that's billions, 13.7 billion years old, that there might be some other life somewhere. I don't know. Probably unlikely they made it this far. No reason for them to pick out Earth because we're not special, despite what many creationists would have you believe. They've got this wily coyote god who straps on a hat and balances on a wire and goes through all...
Matt makes a powerful case here. You don't need God to have meaning, purpose, or morality, and science backs him up. Studies in neuroscience, psychology, and evolutionary biology show that humans are wired for empathy, cooperation, and moral reasoning. Not because of religion, but because these traits helped us survive and thrive as social beings. Purpose doesn't have to come from some ultimate source to be real. It can come from love, family, creativity, curiosity, things we build and share. Just because something ends doesn't mean it was worthless. That's true for life, relationships, and even a good story. As for morality, Matt's right again. Objective moral systems can be built without appealing to a higher power. We observe the consequences of our actions. We learn what causes harm and what creates well-being. That's reason. That's evidence. And that's enough. Matt doesn't pretend to have all the answers. He just refuses to accept bad ones. He's willing to change his mind, but only for a good reason. That's intellectual honesty. And that's the foundation for a better world. So here's the question. If the life you're living now is the only one you're sure you have, what are you doing to make it count?
why you care about that standard, just like you don't have an objective reason why you care about a God. If there was a God, he should come along and kind of clarify all this. I would think that would be a duty. But the beautiful story that you're talking about, where the most powerful being comes down and becomes a cell, becomes one of the weak, one of the fallen, in order to save them. That's an incredibly nice way to package it, but I have, I guess, a completely different take on it, because the story is a little different. The story starts in Genesis, where God creates everybody, and then it all screws up, and then he tries to fix it, and it screws up, and he tries to fix it, and it screws up. It's this parade, it's this comedy of errors. And then you get to a spot where God, who's been demanding that we slaughter animals and burn them because he likes barbecue, is now decided that he's going to come down and take human form and sacrifice himself to himself for a weekend to fix everything for everybody. That's blood magic. That is sacrificial blood magic thinking, and nothing to do about human value.
Who actually believes that? What you just described as a summary of Christianity. Who actually believes?
How could you not?
Wait,
did God come down and become human, sacrifice himself?
God the Son became God our brother.
He's still God.
God the Son became God our brother. Right?
But
the Son of
are
the
you
Father.
a non-Trinitarian? Sorry?
That's precisely because I'm Trinitarian. God the Son became God our brother, full of the Holy Spirit, in order to unite us as family back to the same source, back to the Father. This is basic Trinitarian theology.
Did God not sacrifice himself?
The Father sent the Son.
But they're the same.
They're not the same.
They're part of the Trinity.
Yeah, they are definitely.
They are one, right?
They are definitely part of the Trinity.
Are they one, though?
They are united, absolutely. The Father, Son, and Spirit.
United. I mean, we're united at a table, but we're not one.
The Father is in the Son, and the Son is in the Father, so that they are united on a level that is far superior to ours. But they are
why does there need to be a
person.
blood sacrifice?
Well, because to walk away from God, to be disconnected from life, means death. Right, and in the Bible, the life is in the blood.
Well, who made that rule?
It's the nature of the case, don't you think? If God is life, if God is a source of life,
couldn't God have done it differently?
Well, if God is the source of life and we reject life, what does that leave us with? Death. If God wants to unite with us in our death, what will he have to take on? Our death.
So you're talking, first of all, you're speaking kind of metaphorically here, because I'm not rejecting life. I'm rejecting a proposition that there's some eternal life because I don't see sufficient evidence for it. If there is, cool. But God, this notion, why does there need to be a blood sacrifice at all? At some point, we were running around killing animals and doing it because God loved the smell of burning flesh. Literally, it says that. Now, while it's... I know what I think I know what part of the objection is. It's like the Easter story when atheists will say, and then the zombies rose up and marched on Jerusalem, and people will be like, there's nothing in the Bible about zombies, but it does talk about the dead getting up out of their graves and going in there, and so it's a colloquialism to refer to it as zombies. I don't think even the atheists, by and large, are thinking that we're talking Walking Dead here, but it's a shorthand to show that there's something that's potentially absurd here, an extraordinary claim that doesn't have evidence for it. This isn't even that. This isn't even an extraordinary claim doesn't have evidence for it. This is, to me, bizarre. What is it about killing something that God needs you to do in order for God to forgive you? Because if God is the creator of everything, including the rules of how all this works, couldn't he have come up with rules that don't involve killing things?
Matt is right to challenge the idea that morality requires blood. Historically, the concept of sacrifice, especially human or animal, was common in Bronze Age cultures long before Judaism or Christianity. The idea that a god demands blood to fix what he created flawed in the first place isn't moral. It's borrowed mythology, not ethical reasoning. Modern moral philosophy doesn't rely on ancient rituals. In fact, research in evolutionary biology and neuroscience shows that cooperation, empathy, and fairness evolved naturally in human and even primate societies. Frans de Waal's studies on bonobos and chimpanzees show that these animals exhibit moral behaviors, like sharing, consolation, and even punishment of unfairness, without any concept of religion. Morality comes from being social, not from scripture. Matt also highlights a logical contradiction. If God is all-powerful and all-knowing, why couldn't he create a system where forgiveness doesn't require killing? The idea that the life is in the blood isn't a deep truth. It's a line from Leviticus, tied to Iron Age ideas about purity and atonement. And if Christianity's resurrection story were historical, we'd expect some mention outside the Bible. But no Roman, Greek, or Jewish historians of the time, not even Philo or Josephus, recorded a mass resurrection in Jerusalem. That's a huge red flag for anyone asking for evidence. The truth is, we can be moral, we can build a better world, and we can do it without myth, magic, or sacrifice. Let's continue, and let's hear what Glenn has to say.
Well, I mean, first of all, the priest was many other things, but he was also your butcher, right? You would eat the lamb after you sacrificed it. You would eat the bull. You know, we still go to the butcher. We still sacrifice our animals. And in that sacrifice, even today, in a very secular sense, the death of that animal means our life. In that very literal sense, okay, that animal dies so that we might live. And it's just that in the Old Testament, it was also teaching a spiritual dimension. On top of the barbecues that we all love. You're from Texas, I'm from Australia, we love barbecues, okay?
The vegans are going to hate us.
It was a great conversation with Cosmic Skeptic, by the way. On top of that butchery, there was also a spiritual lesson being taught, and the spiritual lesson being taught was not that the blood of this bull is paying for your sin, but that there is a Messiah who is coming who will pay for your sins. Because no, the blood of goats and bulls cannot pay for sin, but God can take responsibility for his handiwork, and God did take responsibility for his handiwork, and it was his death that actually paid for sin. That's the story.
There's nothing, I'm not saying that secular humanism guarantees a better world. But even if we take what Glenn's saying, even if you were to look at this as Christianity light without the God thing, I would already view that as better because A, we guarantee that we have humans' best interests at heart. That's humanism. It's the foundation of it. You can say, and you would be correct, that it's just a bold, bald assertion that we should care about humans. Okay? I have no response to that. I don't even know why anybody would want to come up with a response. There's nothing that says the world will be better this way, except for this. I did a debate in a Church of Christ where I told them I could write a better book than the Bible and I could prove it to them. Because I could rewrite it word for word, reverse its position on slavery, and it would be a better book. Because for the people who are looking at this, not so much as metaphorical lessons or like that, if they're looking at this as an instruction book for life, that book advocates slavery. That's not even a question. If you were to say, thou shalt not own a human being as property, that would be better than saying you can and that you can pass them on. And so this was the example I used for the people who are kind of like Bible worshipers, not the people who go in looking for, hey, there's an interesting message here, or they're going to tell me something about my life, but no, this is literally word for word, blah, you know. That type of mindset is probably more responsible for the harm and damage that a lot of us would lay at the foot of Christianity than Glenn's version. For sure. I mean, I don't think Glenn's pro-slavery at all. And when you start looking at things where you are finding a way to take a message that could easily be viewed as this is a blood magic sacrifice and say, well, life has to consume life to exist, and you want to kind of maybe blow off why God would have made it that way or why it had to be made that way, which is a weird and interesting theological discussion. Getting rid of those things and keeping the good parts is all I've advocated for ever. And secular humanism, to me, is taking the good parts, whether they're found in Christianity, Judaism, Scientology.
Glenn tries to reframe ancient blood sacrifice as symbolic or meaningful, saying it teaches a spiritual lesson. But that ignores the obvious. It still hinges on the idea that killing something is required for forgiveness. That's not moral. That's Bronze Age thinking. No modern legal or ethical system requires an innocent third party to suffer so someone else can be forgiven. That would be unjust. And saying life consumes life doesn't explain anything about divine justice. It's a biological fact, not a moral one. In nature, predation is about survival, not redemption. To tie that to sin and sacrifice is a category error. Worse, Glenn admits the blood of bulls couldn't pay for sin, so God killed himself to satisfy his own rules. That's not profound. That's convoluted. An all-powerful being wouldn't need a workaround involving torture and execution. Matt's comparison to secular humanism is simple and accurate. It doesn't guarantee a better world, but it gives us tools that actually work. Morality based on well-being is measurable. We can study what reduces suffering and increases flourishing. No divine command needed. And when Matt points out that rewriting just one verse to say don't own people would improve the Bible, he's right. That's not nitpicking. That's moral clarity.
Well, Matt said that he could write a Bible that's superior to the Bible by reversing its position on slavery. I think if you started from scratch without the Bible, though, I don't think you, and I don't think anyone has, written a book or a series of books or a collection of books, a library of books, that has done what the Bible has done for slavery in the world. Because slavery is a human universal, and it has not been overturned by anyone other than those who took the Bible seriously back in the 18th century. They were evangelical Christians, they were Quakers, they were people who took the Bible seriously. So
parts of it seriously.
It's a longer discussion about how you take the Old Testament. But that's got to be interesting, at least, because we can't do a compare and contrast. There's no A/B testing about this. Okay, there's only
which I think kind of undermines what you were just saying. And I sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm in agreement with you. Mm-hmm. You're viewing it as nobody else has done this, and you don't think anybody else could. And my thing is, we have no way to find that out because we live in a world where this is the way things happened. And so to argue that you couldn't actually write a list of moral precepts from scratch that are superior to Christianity.
Well, but then aren't you saying, okay, at least with the Christian side, we've got, there is one group of people that has guaranteed universal equality for all human beings and has ended the slave trade. Okay, it might have taken far longer than you would have wanted it to have taken. But there is one group of people who have done that. We don't know if anyone has or could do that. Let's give it a go anyway. Let's walk away from this thing that has given us all these benefits of the universities and the hospitals and the schools and the scientific method and the emancipation of the slaves and all this sort of stuff. Let's walk away from that. That's quite a leap of faith, don't you think?
And am I also getting the sense, Glenn, that I want to come back to this human at the centre of this, and the fact that Matt says, hey, humans are humans, and it's natural that we're going to prefer ourselves, and that's where the morality comes from, our own best interests. And you're saying, no, somehow Christianity has actually grounded an intrinsic dignity to the human that Matt's godless ethics isn't necessarily going to support. It might go in that direction for a moment, but there's no ultimate foundation to it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. We are always going to look after ourselves, but who is we and who are ourselves in that conversation? And we are always wanting to narrow the circle around us and our mates and exclude the other tribe and exclude the other kinds of people. So, in the news here in the UK, just recently they brought in a non-invasive prenatal test for Down syndrome. And it had the reliable effect that everybody knew it was going to have. As people knew that they were going to have children with Down syndrome, they aborted them at ever higher rates. And yet the headlines said, children with Down syndrome down 30%. And it sounded like people had found a cure for Down syndrome or something like that. They hadn't found a cure for Down syndrome. They'd just drawn the circle around humanity and kept those with that condition on the outside and wanted to eliminate them. And that, to me, is a very chilling way of proceeding with a kind of a humanism, because that's always the danger. Who is us? Who are those who we are going to grant with the right to life? And who are those who we are going to say, they do not qualify? And it's always tempting for the humans to say, okay, it's the strong who will make the decision, and it's the weak who must take the hindmost. What is it that's going to stand up for all humans, regardless of capacity, regardless of attributes, regardless of achievements? Who is it who's going to stand up for all humans and actually be true humanists and grant them human rights too?
This is the problem. So first of all, whether or not that abortion scenario that you're talking about is humanism or not is subject for a whole nother debate. But you say, well, nobody could do this. And then when we talk about here's a list of precepts where we don't include a God in it. Then your answer is, now you're just borrowing from Christianity. It's Christianity light, and you've just removed the God. And then the other objection that you're going to launch to secular morality is, what's going to be the foundation beyond this? At least we have a foundation. It's God. Well, what if people don't accept your foundation? That is exactly the same objection that you are leveraging, you're launching at secular humanism. Whatever problems secular humanism may have with regard to foundations of ethics, no religious foundation has any way of solving that. Because ultimately, until some God comes in and says, I am in fact the God of the universe and I am the moral authority, and people are forced to recognize that this is the case, then the only thing that's happening is Glenn's saying God is the foundation of morality and I'm saying humans are. And nobody is going to be, neither of those systems is going to work for people who don't accept that that's a foundation.
Do people have to all recognize this foundation in order for it to be the foundation?
No, and people don't need to recognize that 2 + 2 = 4 for it to be the case that 2 + 2 = 4, and for you to go to your grave proclaiming that 2 + 2 = 4. Even if the whole world said it was otherwise, then 2 + 2 would still equal 4. People don't need to recognize a moral truth to be a moral truth for it to be moral.
They do if you're talking about a moral system. If you want to create, computer code and get people to start programming in it, you've got to be able to convince them about ones and zeros.
Yeah.
So 2 + 2 = 4 isn't even in the same ballpark of there is a God. It's either true or it's not, but it's not a foundation for something. If you're talking about a moral system, the true foundation is agreement on what the foundation is, that the three of us care about human beings. And then we can start arguing about how much we care and where there's going to be conflicts and everything else. But we can't do any of that until we agree on that foundation. And if Glenn's foundation is there's a God at the bottom of this and he can't demonstrate that, then we're not even going to get started on solving the problem.
That's not what 2 + 2 = 4 is the analog of in this conversation. 2 + 2 = 4 is the analog of all human beings are worthy of provision and protection. All of them. Right? Would you agree with that? All members of the human family, no matter what their achievements, no matter what their attributes, all members of the human family are worthy of all provision and protection.
I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. That's a problem. It's definitely a problem, especially when you've got people who are discovering disabled children in the womb.
When I say I have no idea, it's about that simplification. My instinct is, of course, to say yes.
Glenn argues that Christianity offers a unique foundation for universal human dignity, but history doesn't support that. The Bible never clearly condemns slavery, genocide, or misogyny. In fact, it often reinforces them. Yes, some Christians helped end slavery, but they did it by rejecting biblical passages, not following them. And many use the exact same scriptures to defend slavery, segregation, and oppression for centuries. Matt's right to point out that a moral system doesn't need divine command. Morality comes from understanding human needs, preventing harm, and promoting well-being. We know this from decades of research in moral psychology and ethics. Thinkers like Peter Singer, Judith Jarvis Thompson, and John Rawls have laid out secular moral systems built on fairness, empathy, and justice, without invoking gods, blood, or fear. Glenn's example about Down syndrome and abortion is emotionally charged, but it's misleading. Decisions about reproductive health are individual moral dilemmas, not a product of secular ethics trying to erase anyone. Humanism says every person matters because they are a person, not because a holy book says so. That includes people with disabilities, the elderly, and even people with whom we disagree. And Glenn's last move, saying, God is the foundation, whether you believe it or not, misses the point entirely. You can't build a moral system on something unprovable and expect universal agreement. Matt is right. A shared foundation only works if people agree on it. And right now, the only thing we can agree on is this. We're human. We want to suffer less, and we're better off when we treat each other with dignity and care. So here's the question. Do we really need ancient myths to know that kindness, fairness, and freedom matter? Or are we ready to build something better ourselves?
You made a statement a couple of months ago that I found very interesting. And I don't claim to understand it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot with it. You said that you were a cultural Christian. Okay, and so that raised a number of questions in my mind. And the first question was,
you are changing the subject.
No, I'm not. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I may be leaping outside of the topic a bit to get back to it.
We can do cultural Christianity, but I think, because I have a list of questions that you wanted to ask, and that is one of them. But I think Professor Dawkins did ask you...
You were referring to the predictive power and to the utility of the stories.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually what I was trying to zero in on. Okay, so that was the point. Well, it seemed to me that your proclamation that you were a cultural Christian was a recognition and a statement that you had found something in the culture that had been derived from Christianity that you had an affinity with, and that there's some reason for that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, well, what do you think that Christianity got right that allows you to make a statement like that? I mean, I know that there's differences perhaps in what we both think about the ultimate veracity of the biblical stories. Maybe there isn't differences. Like, it would take a lot of conversation to figure this out. But what did you mean by that? Like, what do you think that Christianity got right that would enable you to make a statement like that?
Virtually nothing. I meant by that no more than that I'm brought up in a Christian culture. I went to Christian schools. I therefore know my way around the Bible. I know my way around the Book of Common Prayer. I know the hymns. That's all. I don't value Christianity as a truth system at all.
Okay, so let me ask you about that, because maybe that's true and perhaps it's not. So the first question is, like, do you think that there are any marked differences between cultural traditions that would enable you to rank order them in terms of their ethical validity?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so for example, we could contrast mainstream UK Christianity with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
There is a hierarchy.
Okay, a hierarchy that points to what?
Well, in the case of Islam, I dislike any religion which punishes apostasy with death, that throws gay people off high buildings, that practices clitoridectomy. That seems to me to place Islam on a lower level than Christianity, but that's not to say anything very positive about Christianity.
Well, it might be to say something positive about Christianity. Like, I think that question is open, because you might ask yourself, what did Christianity get right that led it away from those particular presumptions and towards something that you regard as more ethically appropriate? Like, this isn't a trivial question.
It's a very modest claim. There's not very much. I mean, to be better than a religion that throws gay people off high buildings is not really a very virtuous achievement.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, because if you look at the barbarism that characterizes the human past, you might think that any progression whatsoever towards something approximating mercy and tolerance is nothing short of a bloody miracle.
Well,
like, people are pretty ruthless, and so are our chimpanzee cousins.
Yes, they are.
Right. So,
yes.
So we move forward into the light with great difficulty.
Yes,
and
yes.
The fact that we can take that for granted now, and that it seems self-evident and deserving of faint praise, it's not so clear to me that that's a reasonable proposition.
Okay, let's grant the faint praise, but that has nothing to do with the truth value, and what I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin?
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. My experience has been that the more, I know from a metaphorical perspective and from a mythic perspective what the story of the virgin birth means, and I accept that. I know, for example, that any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies. And I don't know how that needs to be expressed in a form.
Is it true, though?
Do you mean that you don't know?
Well,
Dawkins is making an evidence-based argument. Christianity as a belief system doesn't hold up to scrutiny. There's no empirical evidence for the virgin birth, resurrection, or miracles. None of these claims meet the standards of historical verification. For example, Bart Ehrman, a respected New Testament scholar, points out that the Gospels were written decades after Jesus' death by anonymous authors, full of contradictions and theological bias. That's not reliable evidence, it's religious tradition. When Peterson talks about holding the mother and child sacred, he shifts to metaphor. But metaphors don't prove anything. They might feel meaningful, but they're not evidence for a god, a virgin birth, or divinity. Dawkins stays focused on truth. Peterson avoids the question entirely. When Dawkins is asked something, he gives a clear answer. When Peterson is asked, he deflects. That's why Dawkins calls it out. Maybe Peterson doesn't actually believe these things and doesn't want to admit it. And the idea that Christianity led us toward mercy and tolerance? History doesn't support that. The Inquisition, witch trials, slavery justified by Scripture, and opposition to women's rights and science all came from dominant Christian cultures. Progress came in spite of religion, not because of it, led by secular thinkers like Voltaire, Thomas Paine, Bertrand Russell, and modern human rights advocates. Dawkins is right to say, cultural familiarity doesn't mean truth, and religious comfort doesn't equal evidence. Let's continue watching.
Let me ask you about that, because truth, this is something I talked with Sam Harris about too. Truth, as we know, is a tricky business. Do you think there are differences in the truth claims between different writers of fiction? Like, is Dostoevsky more profound than...
No, well, I wouldn't call fiction truth claims anyway. I mean, he's a...
Then on what grounds do we rank order the fiction in terms of quality? Like, Dostoevsky is a profound purveyor of fiction on the philosophical front, unbelievably deep and profound.
Yes,
there's something true about what he's writing about.
It's nothing to do with the truth that science is concerned with. The truth of science is the truth that gets us to the moon. I mean, this is nothing to do with whether one writer of fiction has a sort of insight into human nature. That goes without saying. I accept that.
Okay, so how do we deal with the notion that on the purely factual side, how do we deal with the idea, let's take you talked about clitoridectomy, let's talk about the oppression of women.
Yes.
We make a scientific case that that's inappropriate? Or is it a case that we're making on some other grounds? Like I see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the earliest pronouncements is that both men and women carry the image of God, both. And that sets a certain tone to everything that follows. And it is a remarkable proclamation given its radical age, that both men and women carry the image of God and are to be treated as something with intrinsic value outside of the domain of power and politics. And it isn't obvious to me, having thought about this a lot, how we deal with that in the pure realm of fact. Because one of the facts is, if I can oppress you, why the hell shouldn't I?
Yeah, my job is to keep things on track here. I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
Okay.
When Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth, you started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question, but is that your answer, that you don't know?
I said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection is. My knowledge just ends.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise. So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Let's stick to the virgin birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, well, the virgin birth results from a mistranslation of Isaiah. You know that.
Like these sorts of questions, what would you say? They don't strike me as, they're not getting to the point.
I know
the story has a purpose.
Yes.
Well, and look, I understand that there's perfect reasons to debate this. I know that, and I know that your question is more than valid, but it's beside the issue as far as I'm concerned, and it's partly because, well, when we started this conversation, I said, for example, that it appears to be the case that a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. We see the world through a story. And so that's a remarkable thing. That's a remarkable discovery, and it's emerged probably in the last 60 years in multiple disciplines, because we have to prioritize our facts. And so we prioritize them according to a particular pattern. And there are patterns that seem to work and to propagate themselves properly and to orient cultures towards life abundant. And there are other patterns, the pattern of Cain, for example, that lead to absolute bloody devastation. And I don't know exactly how to construe that sort of truth. But we talked about the oppression of women, for example. It's like, how do you make a case on purely factual grounds that women should be treated as equals?
It's a moral question, and
I know that's exactly.
And I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? And you won't answer it.
Well, Jesus it's a different had an kind of question. Father and a heavenly father, like almost all mythological heroes.
So he wasn't born of a virgin, then. So you're saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin?
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's not a value. It's a simple fact. I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question.
Dawkins asked a simple question. Was Jesus born of a virgin? Peterson danced around it for minutes without answering. That's exactly the problem Dawkins is pointing out. If the core claims of Christianity can't be answered as facts, they collapse under basic scrutiny. The virgin birth isn't just unverified, it's based on a mistranslation. The original Hebrew word in Isaiah 7:14 is alma, which means young woman, not virgin. The Greek Septuagint mistranslated it as parthenos, meaning virgin, and that error made its way into the Gospels. Scholars like Bart Ehrman and Geza Vermes confirm this. It's not controversial, it's academic consensus. Peterson tries to say these stories are powerful because they moved culture, but power doesn't prove truth. Islam, communism, and Nazi ideology also moved millions. That doesn't make them true. He also claims Christianity elevated women. But the Bible repeatedly treats women as property. Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 22, and even Paul's letters instruct women to submit. The real progress for women came through secular law, civil rights movements, and feminist philosophy, not scripture. And when Dawkins asks again, did Jesus have a human father? Peterson still won't say. That's why Dawkins is right. If the answers don't hold up when plainly asked, then the claims don't deserve to be treated as truth. Let's keep watching.
It's not a value question.
You must understand what you're being asked here, that even if you think that, say, the author of the biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events, Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from a scientific perspective, and maybe you think that that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question, did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
Well, suppose we weren't doing that. Suppose we were asking out of interest. Suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
And you wouldn't consider it, I mean, it's not an inappropriate question to ask just on a point of interest.
Right.
Did this really occur? And I think so often people are asking you that, and especially given the context of this conversation, we've heard everything that you're saying about metaphor and myth, but because the question is still then being asked, did it really happen? You know that that's what you're being asked. And the way you just so easily said yes, I wonder why you struggle to do that in so many other circumstances.
I think because I don't look at the situation the same. The way that Dr. Dawkins and I look at the situation are really quite different and at many, many, many levels. You know, so even on the meme question, for example, you know, like I know the literature on the history of religious ideas. I see how these ideas have battled across millennia in a manner that is very reminiscent to me of the same sort of claim that Dr. Dawkins is putting forward with regards to meme. I know that literature. Dr. Dawkins doesn't know that literature. And it's very difficult for me to communicate from within the confines of that literature because it's extensive and deep. And we're dealing with things that We don't understand the relationship between metaphoric truth and value-predicated truth and factual truth. We don't understand that. It's a big problem. There's no evidence whatsoever from the scientific perspective that we can orient ourselves in the world merely in consequence of the facts.
Sure.
And that's a fact. And it's a fact that's been detailed out in great detail in the last 60 years by people from a variety of different disciplines. We have to prioritize the facts. That's a value hierarchy. There may be true and false ways of prioritizing facts, but you can't determine the truth or falsehood of the way that you prioritize facts by making reference to the facts. That's a big problem.
Okay, let's talk about that as perhaps a slight detour here, because I think we do need to come back to this Christ resurrection thing. But Professor Dawkins, would you say that underlying the scientific enterprise is a fundamentally unscientific assumption? You can make scientific investigations in the world, but in order to do so, you need to choose what to prioritize. You need to choose what to investigate. You also need to value the truth. You need to have a value and a motivation for doing it in the first place. Those kinds of things cannot themselves be scientifically justified. And so does the scientific enterprise have an unscientific assumption of the space?
I suppose it does. I mean, I think that maybe just be Jordan and Richard, by the way. I think that Jordan prioritizes myth and I prioritize fact. And I think myth is kind of vaguely interesting, but it's not the be-all and end-all of my life. I think it's somewhat secondary to scientific fact, the sort of facts that tell us how old the universe is, how old the world is, the history of life, the engineering achievements of landing a spacecraft on a comet. These are the things that science can do. And as I said, the predictions of quantum theory, to come back to that, the predictions of quantum theory, which are verified to a sufficient number of decimal places that it's equivalent to predicting the width of North America to one hair's breadth. Now, that is, however difficult quantum theory is to understand, that is what you can get from quantum theory. Now, the mysteries of the Bible, if they are mysteries, aren't in the same league. I mean, they just don't cut it.
Peterson keeps dodging a basic question. Did the virgin birth or resurrection happen as a fact? He talks about myth, metaphor, and the power of stories, but that's not the issue. Dawkins is asking for evidence, not symbolism. Peterson claims truth can't just be about facts, but that's not how we build reliable knowledge. Science is based on observation, testing, and replication, and it works. We can date the Earth to 4.54 billion years with radiometric dating. We can trace the evolution of life through fossils and DNA. And we can land probes on comets using quantum calculations accurate to fractions of a nanometer. That's truth we can build on. Compare that to the Bible. No evidence for a global flood, no external confirmation of the Exodus, and no verifiable proof of a virgin birth or resurrection. These aren't mysteries. They're claims made without evidence. Peterson wants to treat myth as equal to science, but stories are not substitutes for facts. And when Peterson says Dawkins doesn't understand religious literature, that doesn't change the problem. Truth claims require evidence, not familiarity with ancient texts. Dawkins is right. Prioritizing facts over comforting myths is how we make progress. What do you think? Should society lean on ancient stories, or should we demand truth backed by real evidence? Like the video, subscribe for more sharp commentary, and let's keep thinking critically, together.
Evil does exist, as much as that may be a problem for why a loving God would allow evil. Nonetheless, it's a signpost that something beyond the material world has to exist to allow this realm of good and evil to exist.
In fact, I think Alex recognizes that signpost because on his website, he rails, I think rightfully, against some of the abuses of the Roman Catholic Church, where he talks about how priests have sexually abused children, and obviously that's a great wrong. But my question is, Alex, if you really think that is a great wrong, why would you deny objective morality? I mean, is that really wrong, or is it just a matter of personal opinion?
Well, I think that we agree in one sense that evil doesn't necessarily disprove God. I'm with you on that. What I would say is to answer your question, objectively, no. It is a subjective thing. Morality, to me, is entirely subjective.
Why do you say that?
Well, because, firstly, a thing to note is that objective morality... Well, let's talk about what objective actually means, I suppose. Objectivity, to me, if you want my definition, would be to say that it is true regardless of human intervention, regardless of human consciousness. For instance, the Earth orbits the Sun. That would be true if all humans disappeared. Right. Every single one of them. It would still be an objective fact. But to say that murder is wrong, if every human disappeared, that couldn't still be wrong, surely. That would be a nonsense concept without some kind of human psychology. The only way that you could argue that perhaps it would still be wrong is if there was some kind of transcendent being. But then you need to have that being in order to prove the existence of the objective morality that you're then using to prove the God. So
what we're doing is we're reasoning from effect to cause, that we have this effect known as this moral law that is pressing on us. And as you admitted in the video, and look, videos, 2-minute videos, 10-minute videos, you can't expound on all the nuances. So if this is wrong, correct me. But you seem to say that in fact, I think you quoted, the quote was, let me just quote you accurately on this, because in the video you said this, you said moral truths are so deeply ingrained in us that they feel like they are objective. Yes. Right? Okay, so my question is, why would you doubt they're objective if they're so deeply ingrained in us?
Well, because this is where I think Sam Harris is right, in the sense that if you have certain assumptions, so let's say that we could assume that human well-being was a good thing. We'll discuss why shortly, but let's say we assume that. We could then say that it is objectively true that we should act in certain ways, for instance, trying not to murder people. And that would then become an objective morality. Right. So because evolution has instilled within us, through genetics, a drive to stay alive, then we can derive objective moral truths about how we should act in order that complies with this inner nature, which I think has come about through evolution. So even if you don't subscribe to the idea that certain moral actions, such as not killing or not stealing, have come about through evolution, the instinctual nature within us to stay alive causes us to think of those as objective truths. But it's a technicality. So for all intents and purposes, you could say they're objective truths. If you grab 100 people off the street and ask them, is rape wrong? 100 of them will say yes. But that doesn't mean it's objective. I mean, for instance, I put it to you, would you say that chocolate is tasty?
Yeah, I would, but that's a subjective... Right, sure. Some people may not like chocolate.
It's subjective.
Yeah.
That's
a flavor.
So tar can be just as tasty as chocolate. But that's no problem, right? That's no problem whatsoever. So when you say something along the lines of, so morality is subjective. So what Hitler did being wrong was just an opinion. Well, yes, but in the same sense that chocolate tasting as good as tar is an opinion.
I think
it doesn't make a difference.
Alex is right to say morality can be subjective and still meaningful. We don't need a God to recognize that rape, murder, or child abuse are wrong, because we understand harm, suffering, and empathy directly as human beings. That's not a weakness in morality. It's how moral reasoning actually works. Research in evolutionary psychology shows that our sense of right and wrong developed to help humans cooperate and survive. Empathy, fairness, and reciprocity are traits seen not just in humans but in primates, elephants, even rats. These aren't divine instructions. They're natural, social instincts shaped over millions of years. Moral philosopher Philippa Foot showed that moral claims are grounded in human needs and natural facts, not commands from above. When we say something is wrong, we're pointing to real-world harm, not breaking a supernatural rule. Frank's claim that moral disagreement means morality must be objective misunderstands how moral systems develop. Disagreement doesn't mean there's no truth. It means we're still working to understand it, like any area of knowledge. Let's hear Frank Turek's response.
Well, no, I think it does, because it's much more obvious that, say, sexually abusing children is wrong than atheism's true.
Right.
So why would you say that atheism's true in order to avoid the obvious conclusion that sexually abusing children is wrong. You already know sexually abusing children is wrong. Now, if you want to use an evolutionary argument, the problem is that undercuts everything you think. Because if everything we think is the product of evolution, the product of the laws of physics or biology, or whatever it is, then why should we believe anything we think? Forget about morality for a second. Why should we even believe that atheism's true or that Christianity's true? If we're completely... I'm sorry, I'm suffering from jet lag here. If our thoughts are the result of some random evolutionary process, why should we believe anything we think is true?
Well, the first thing is that evolution isn't a random process. But that aside, it's
let me put it this way: it's either directed by an outside intelligence or it's not.
Sure. Okay.
If it's not directed by an outside intelligence, then it's random.
Yes,
So if it's directed by intelligence, then perhaps God exists. If it's not directed by intelligence, why should we believe anything we think?
It's this idea, it's almost sort of existential. Why should we believe anything if there's no guidance? To me, it's like asking the question, like you said earlier, about how do we know that we even exist, or that the universe wasn't created last Thursday? For me, it's somewhat based on consensus. It doesn't prove it's true, but reason is one of those things that we need to assume in order to get anywhere. In the same sense, we need to assume that we exist in order to have a philosophical discussion.
No, that's a very wise point. I agree with you. The question is, how do we explain reason on a naturalistic worldview?
Well, reason and consciousness can be explained as coming about through evolution. The way in which we sense the world.
But let's stop there for just a second, though, Alex. If that's the case, why should we trust it?
Oh, well, we don't necessarily have to. Again, it's a subjective thing. But every single person...
But that would mean reason's subjective.
Yes, it is.
Well, if reason is subjective, then...
If reason's not subjective, then how do you and I come to different conclusions, both using reason?
Because we have free will. If reason's subjective, we couldn't even communicate. If there weren't these objective, unchanging laws of logic...
well, yes, there are objective rules and tenets of reason, but reason itself is subjective in the same way that morality, you can say, under certain assumptions, there are objective truths about morality. If you have a certain assumption about reason, then yes, there are objective tenets.
Well, that's what I mean. These immaterial laws of logic that aren't made of molecules, how do we explain those on a naturalistic worldview?
How do you mean? How do we explain?
Why are there laws of logic? Why are there laws of mathematics?
They're a product of consciousness. And laws of mathematics are not a thing in themselves, but rather a way to explain the universe. So the laws of mathematics would not exist without human beings, so they are subjective. But the things that they describe would.
Oh, no, hold on.
So when you talk about logic, when you talk about reason, these things aren't ends, they're means. They're means to understanding certain things. So we use reason to understand that the Earth goes around the sun.
Frank tries to argue that if our minds are the product of evolution, then we can't trust reason or moral beliefs. But this misunderstands how evolution works. Natural selection favors organisms that accurately perceive and respond to their environment, because those that don't, die. The fact that we can land spacecraft on other planets, predict disease patterns, and build the internet is strong evidence that our evolved brains are reliably processing information. Reason isn't some magical gift that requires a divine source. It's a tool, a cognitive strategy that evolved because it helped our species survive. Neuroscience confirms this. Our brains are built to detect patterns, solve problems, and simulate future outcomes. These abilities enhanced our fitness in the ancestral environment. As for logic and math, those aren't floating laws that exist outside time and space. They're descriptive systems we created to understand consistent patterns in nature. The Pythagorean theorem works not because it was written in the sky by a god, but because we observed relationships in geometry that are always true under certain conditions. Alex is right to say that these tools, reason, logic, math, are means, not ends. They help us model reality. We assume their usefulness because they work. No faith in the supernatural is required.
I like what Louise Antony said in her debate with William Lane Craig. Louise Antony's an atheist, but she admitted something about morality and atheism that I think is very insightful. Here's what she said. This is her quote. She said, "Any argument for moral skepticism will be based upon premises which are less obvious than the existence of objective moral values themselves." And here she is as an atheist saying, I have this sense of moral obligation that is so strong that any argument you give me for atheism or moral subjectivism will be based on the weaker premises than just the sense that I have that objective moral values and obligations exist. So that was my question originally to you, Alex, is why would you deny the strongest belief that you have intuitively and adopt a weaker belief in atheism or agnosticism?
Well, I don't deny it, because I don't deny, like I say, as long as I do have certain assumptions, and I admit that there are assumptions, I can say that I have an objective sense that these things are wrong on the assumption that I'm aiming for human prosperity.
Right, but you already pointed out that Sam Harris is begging the question on that. That is his human flourishing. And that's a conflation of epistemology and ontology. And as you pointed out, rightfully so, and 18 years old, he's already figured this out, which I didn't know this is 18, that Sam Harris is confusing epistemology and ontology. He's assuming what he's trying to prove.
But the problem with Sam Harris's argument is he's going in there trying to show that certain things are right or wrong based on science. What I'm trying to do is say why people experience things as right or wrong based on science, which can be done. So I can say the reason that I feel that this is right and wrong is because of this. What I can't say is that this is right or wrong because of this.
I mean, does this mean, is it a problem for you then, telling people what they ought to do? Because there's a sense in which, you know, if you see a society being racist or treating women unequally or whatever it might be.
Or Catholic priests abusing children like you do on your website, you say that's wrong?
For me, the problem has always been, for the atheist who denies objective morality, is what right do you have to tell someone else? Because they're just acting according to their subjective preferences.
Well, the subjective preferences, I find, in these cases, we often agree. So, for instance, if I meet a member of the Ku Klux Klan, we can find common ground in the sense that I might say, okay, so why is this wrong? Why is that wrong? Why? Until we get to the final point and they say, well, I think that it's because my worldview is better for humanity. And I say, well, hang on, so do I. I think my worldview is better for humanity. So let's go on the assumption that what we want is to get what's best for humanity. And here's how I think my worldview leads to that. So even people...
but if they say, but I don't believe black people are human... What do you say to that?
Well, that's the thing. Then the discussion doesn't become. Then the discussion becomes trying to prove how they are.
Right.
You sort of remove the need for a basis once you find out what the basis of their beliefs are. Once you find that common ground. For instance, me and you agree. You and I agree that, for instance, I assume that we would agree that human flourishing is a good thing.
Oh, sure.
But you would say that that's because you have that in you because of God. I say that I have that in me because of evolution.
It's not just because it's in me, but because there's an objective standard of goodness outside of ourselves.
Absolutely
and
fine.
so when you say that we can agree that we want to have a better society, as Justin pointed out earlier, you're implying a best. Because in order to say something's better or worse, you have to imply a best. Well, what is that best? What is the ontological grounding of that best?
Not necessarily. You don't have to have... This reminds me of one of Thomas Aquinas' famous 5 ways, the degrees of perfection. There doesn't need to be an absolute perfection to have an idea of something which is more perfect than something else. And to your reference of C.S. Lewis...
I think there would have to be a standard of perfection or a standard that you're aiming for to say you're getting closer to that standard or further away, better or worse.
It's like your reference to C.S. Lewis. You can't know a crooked line without having some idea of straight. I don't think that's true. For instance, think of it this way.
Why is it not true?
It's not a case, if you're talking about good and evil, you don't need evil to know good. If you think about, say you have a flat plane.
You're absolutely right about that.
Think about you have a flat plane.
You don't need evil to know good, I agree with you. So you need good to know evil, though.
I don't think so either. If you have a flat plane, you can see like a hill, like an indentation on that flat plane. Now, the rest of that plane is not a valley. You don't need the valley to understand the hill. You just need the hill in comparison to what is neutral. So you can have evil compared to what is neutral. You can have good compared to what is neutral. You don't need the two extremes.
What would be your definition of evil?
My definition of evil? Well, that's a very broad thing. But if you're asking me, again, subjectively, anything I would say that unwarrantedly elicits human suffering or animal suffering to an extent.
Okay,
as well.
so that would imply that it's the opposite of human flourishing. So it's very difficult to define evil without reference to good.
Not necessarily. It's not. It may be the opposite of human flourishing, but it's also just the absence of no suffering, not necessarily good, but no evil. In the same sense, this is what frustrates me about atheists a lot, is they'll do the same thing but the opposite. They'll look at God and they'll think of the evil. They'll listen to Hitchens talk about some celestial North Korea and they'll recoil at that and they'll say that's a horrible thing. I can't imagine that reality. But I'm sorry, just because you don't like a reality doesn't make it not real. And so if there are no objective morals, then unfortunately what Joseph Stalin did in the USSR was not objectively wrong. But that's not a shocking thing to say if we're under the assumption that nothing is objectively wrong.
Do you understand then why for many people the moral argument is so powerful?
Absolutely.
Because they cannot get themselves to a point of view where those kinds of acts are only really about people's preferences.
But I don't think that's what Frank is necessarily doing, because I think you're right that a lot of people do just recoil in horror at the idea of there being no objective standard, but I don't think that's what you're doing. I'd say that you're being cleverer than that. You're understanding that yes, this is a bad idea, but more than that, you're saying that there's some way to prove that there is an objective reality, not just because you don't like it.
Yeah, I want to get beyond that, or maybe I should say underneath that, going back to Justin's point, and it's this. If you said this is all the result of evolution, you have to get outside the evolutionary process to believe that thought is true. Because if that thought is a result of the evolutionary process as well, why believe it?
Frank appeals to emotion when he says that without objective morality, we can't call things like Stalin's atrocities truly wrong. But this only proves that people feel moral convictions deeply. It doesn't prove they're grounded in something supernatural. Alex is right to point out that we can talk about better and worse actions based on their consequences, specifically how they affect well-being and reduce suffering. That's not arbitrary. It's measurable. If a society promotes human flourishing, reduces cruelty, and improves life for the most people, that's a clear moral improvement, even without invoking a divine standard. Philosophers like Derek Parfit and Peter Singer have shown that you don't need a god to get to universal ethics. You just need reason, empathy, and a commitment to consistency. Most people already agree on basic moral values because we're wired for empathy and shaped by social norms. And when we disagree, we use reason and evidence to argue for better outcomes, not scripture. Christianity doesn't own morality. In fact, some of the Bible's moral teachings, like support for slavery, genocide, and patriarchy, are now considered deeply wrong because our understanding of morality has evolved. So Alex is right. Morality is not about divine rules. It's about how we treat each other in the real world. What do you think makes a society truly moral? Dogma or compassion? If you found this valuable, like the video, subscribe, and join us for more honest conversations that put reason first.
In 13 countries of the world, atheism is a capital offense. You can be put to death for non-belief. We have literally helped dozens of atheists leave their homes and find safety, thereby escaping prison, mob violence, and even death.
We were chatting beforehand, I was checking with some friends, and one of the questions came up about comedy and the fact that we couldn't think of many, if any, comedians who were religious. I'm not asking for example, I'm just saying, do we think it's a thing that most stand-ups tend to be agnostic or atheist? Or?
I think so. I think that's because a lot of comedians are critical thinkers. I think a lot of them are science-based.
They're intelligent.
Well, I don't want to. Well, yeah. But then a lot of religious people are intelligent, but they've been got at an early age, and it's like, I think they're braver. Some people, there's still a thing of not saying I'm an atheist because people think that it's a bad thing to be.
I read that Ricky had an early ambition to be a scientist, and his attitude to science seems to me exactly right. Though, of course, he wouldn't claim to be a scientist. To quote him, "Science seeks the truth, and it does not discriminate. For better or worse, it finds things out. Science is humble. It knows what it knows, and it knows what it doesn't know. It bases its conclusions and beliefs on hard evidence, evidence that is constantly updated and upgraded. It doesn't get offended when new facts come along. It embraces the body of knowledge. It doesn't hold on to medieval practices because they are tradition." And the following seems to me to show an admirably scientific attitude to theology.
The existence of God is not subjective. He either exists or he doesn't. It's not a matter of opinion. You can have your own opinions, but you can't have your own facts. Ricky is immensely famous, of course, and he's very gracious about being stopped in the street and other aspects of fame. But being famous also prompted a typically witty remark on the subject of the widespread belief that only religious people are moral. Being famous is like believing in God. Someone's watching you all the time. I've never quite known how to cope with the retort that it's only extremists who get a religion a bad name. Ricky's answer to that at least hits one nail on the head. You can easily spot any religion of peace. Its extremist members would be extremely peaceful. Literary scholars have sometimes pointed out how fine can be the line between tragedy and comedy. Some of the greatest comedians and comic characters have been close to tragedy. Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Tony Hancock, Falstaff, Basil Fawlty. Ricky Gervais is one of the world's great comedians, but unlike some comedians, he's not himself a tragic figure. He's a happy man with an endearing smile, a laughing court jester in a dark time. He uses humor to lift us all out of despond. Other comedians may do that in an escapist way, making us laugh as a way of running away from the dark reality of life. Ricky doesn't do that. On the contrary, he goes right to the heart of the darkness, tackles the evils of life and the evil people by confronting them head-on and laughing at them. As he himself said, if you can't joke about the most horrendous things in the world, what's the point of jokes? What's the point in having humor? Humor is to get us over terrible things. Ladies and gentlemen, atheists and rationalists, I give you a great hero of our movement, our own wittily creative, infectiously laughing court jester, Ricky Gervais.
Fantastic. I can take that back from you, actually, Ricky. I did.
Okay, you sit down, I think.
I'll sit down. That's it. Good night.
Now, Richard, did you
if
do that?
If you'd have been all in black, that would have looked like a really amazing trick.
I thought you'd do that with the power of your mind. That was amazing. So we're going to chat about things, and I'm going to start off picking up on one of the topics you mentioned there, which is, I think for many people in the public, atheists have this sort of reputation for being a little bit down in the world and a little bit pessimistic. Are you, I mean, we're living in quite a difficult time in the moment. Are you optimistic people? Are you optimistic about the future?
Well, I don't know if I'm optimistic. I don't know. I'm happy. I've always been happy. I've always tried to get the most out of life. I worked out early on that was the shortcut I wanted. I just wanted to be happy. I did that first and then decided how I was going to sort of make a living. Am I optimistic? I mean, I've got nothing to fear. I look at this a bit like a holiday. We don't exist for 13.5 billion years. Then we exist for 80, 90, 100 years, if we're lucky. And you experience everything. It's amazing. I mean, it's amazing to be alive. The chances of us being here, as us, that sperm hitting that egg, is 400 trillion to 1. It's incredible that we're here, you know. And then we die, never to exist again, you know. And some people even get offended by me saying that. They say things like, you don't know that. No, I'll probably live again. You know. Someone said on Twitter once to me, why don't you pray just in case there's a God? And I said, why don't you put garlic over your door just in case there's a Dracula? But I've got no problem with praying. You know, It doesn't bother me. I've never been bothered by spirituality. I don't believe in it, but a personal belief has never been a danger.
Ricky Gervais understands what science is, a method that tests ideas, accepts evidence, and changes when it must. That simple approach has driven every real advance in human history. Knowledge grows by questioning, not by guarding tradition. On God, Gervais is blunt. Either one exists or not. Belief doesn't change facts. The same goes for morality. The Bible allows slavery, demands women's submission, and commands violence. These rules were enforced for centuries. Progress came only when people rejected them. When reason and human struggle built ideas of equality and rights. Gervais also challenges the claim that atheism is bleak. He calls life a rare accident, a chance against staggering odds, and finds joy in that truth. No promise of eternity is needed. What matters is the brief span we have and how we use it. And he does this with humor. He mocks cruelty, laughs at dogma, and turns comedy into defiance. That laughter is not denial. It is strength. So the issue is simple. Face reality as it is, or keep hiding behind stories that were written to keep us in line.
I suppose that's the nearest approach to a crocoduck, and that is real.
That is real.
But actually,
because it's only monotremes that it produces eggs and milk, it could make its own custard. But it... It doesn't, but it definitely could.
Well, it could. I use that instant stuff, so it could use that as well. If you get a whisk, it would be fine.
Yes. It is amazing. I mean, some Australian mammals. It's because is it true that it floated away and there weren't predators as such? So,
there were predators actually,
but they didn't.
They've mostly gone extinct. There was a giant predatory carnivorous kangaroo, for example, which must have been quite terrifying.
Oh my!
Bounding after you with its jaws agape.
Yeah. Oh, we should bring them back. Can we?
I think so. Yes.
Can we? You started it, but turned into an idiot on Twitter.
No.
Can we bring back the mammoth? You know? Can we?
Yeah.
We could.
I think we can, can't you?
Well, I don't know.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome. Would that be the greatest thing ever?
It'd be amazing.
Can we bring back the mammoth?
There is a serious possibility. The genome of the mammoth is being pretty much worked out, and the technology to actually bring it back isn't there yet. But we've got the genome, and so it doesn't seem totally impossible that you could...
Now, what does that mean? Do you mean you've synthesized something, or you've put together bits of DNA, or the DNA exists and you found it in the elephant and modified it? What does it mean? We've got the. Do you mean you've got the thing that would make a mammoth if it was?
Well, because frozen mammoths died sufficiently recently, and they're frozen in the Arctic, so that there's plenty of tissue there. You can get plenty of DNA. There's a lovely Hilaire Belloc poem about the frozen mammoth, which ends up, I can't remember how it goes, but if the skin be, it will make an excellent soup, but the snag is, if the skin be but punctured before it is boiled, your confection is wholly and utterly spoiled. And hence, on account of the size of the beast, the dainty is nearly unknown. But anyway, there it is. It's.
If you don't know the answer, Richard, just say so.
Right, you asked for this. Okay.
So how would we bring it back? What is the process? What would we do?
The process is that you use the soft tissues of this frozen mammoth to sequence the DNA, and that's pretty much been done with a little bit of filling in with elephant DNA as well. Now, what we don't yet have the ability to do is to implant that DNA into an elephant egg, and then put the elephant egg with mammoth DNA into a female elephant, and then grow the embryo.
So it would be a hybrid at most.
No.
How could you see? So you'd clone the mammoth and just use that as a surrogate.
You remember Dolly the sheep?
Yeah.
Well, it would be that kind of thing. So Dolly it was a sheep egg, and into that sheep egg was put the DNA of another sheep.
Right.
and then it was cloned.
If a mammoth baby come out, wouldn't that surprise the elephant?
No doubt, yes, no doubt.
Like,
a lot of people have hairy babies.
Tusks and everything like that.
Yeah. Well, elephants have got tusks.
Oh, that's true, actually.
It's just hairier than the...
Yes.
Yeah.
If you could clone a mammoth, would you do it? Not clone, would you?
I would, but there are many who wouldn't. There are many who think it would be unethical somehow to do this. They think it would be cruel.
Why would it be cruel? Because it wouldn't ever be in its natural habitat. It
Well,
wouldn't understand modern technology.
If it was just on its own, I mean, if you made lots of them, and there's some people think that we should actually clone lots of them and let them loose on the Siberian tundra to bring back the ecology that's disappeared.
I'd bring back Tyrannosaurus Rex. I'd let it loose in parts of England, to be honest. But
Ricky, would you do it if you were part of the committee deciding whether to bring back a mammoth? How would you vote?
I don't know. Why would I? Would I be doing it just because I could? Because that's something to be said. He what? He what?
Chinese scientist who cloned the twins with something like to protect them against HIV. How did that work out?
I don't know.
I didn't hear.
Yes.
I don't know about that.
I'm not certain of the answer. I was a lot more comfortable when we were talking about crocoducks, though. I'll give you that. So, okay, so we'll move on a bit. Away from mammoths and crocoducks. So atheism. So I can remember, and I don't know whether this has any resonance for you at all, but I can remember listening to you on the radio, and I can't place this. I know it's a long time ago, and I would think it's after the initial success of The Office, I think. And I think it's Steve Wright, but I might be wrong. And he said something like, you must wake up in the morning and say, thank God for my amazing things that are happening. And you said, why would I say thank God? I'm an atheist.
Right.
And it was the first time I'd heard the word atheist on kind of public radio.
Well, there shouldn't even be the word, should there? If people didn't invent gods, I wouldn't have to deny them. And it's just... but it's like... I was told when I sort of started breaking America to not mention I was an atheist.
Really?
Oh, 'cause first thing I did. On every first thing I did. Why? What am I going to lose? Imagine not doing something because people hate you because of what you are. That's that's my only thing I've got. I'm a white, rich, middle-class man, but at least I'm hated for being an atheist. Do you know what I mean? I'm oppressed. I'm oppressed in 13 countries I'd never go to anyway.
Have you seen a change in your, over the last, 20 years or so, about how atheism is perceived?
Well, you sort of do it. There's part of me that does it because I think I should, that there is someone being persecuted now that might, I can't change the world, but what I mean, maybe someone in a Western world that thinks they shouldn't come out because it's a bad thing. Because it's still a bad thing in Western society. In America, they took a vote, America, right? Probably that big bit in the middle of America. But we were voted least trustworthy group, joint bottom with rapists. So there's still a thing about, I better not say I'm an atheist, it'll annoy my mum or dad or granddad or school. There's still that. So you do that. Some of it I do it as an intellectual pursuit, because someone asks me a question, I'd rather give the right answer than the wrong answer. I'd rather tell the truth than lie, because it's easier, I think the big thing, people think I run into churches and go, it's all fucking bollocks. I don't care. But if I'm asked if I believe in God, I'll say no. The tricky one is I did a film called The Invention of Lying, where I did a scene where 7 people saw that film. where my mother in that is dying, and it's because I'm the only person in the society who can lie, she says, I don't want to go to nothingness. And I go, there's not nothingness. It's a beautiful place you go, and you're young again. And I invent heaven, right? And that comes from the fact that when my mum was dying, I did face a dilemma. If she'd have said, do you think there's a God? That's a personal thing, and that's I just try and be honest, really. And the other thing is, if someone else's kid, 5-year-old, asks me, do I believe in God? I sort of think, what should I say here? And I say, well, I don't, but a lot of people do. What do you think? I try and, there's still a level of diplomacy. It's not always my place. You know what I mean? I don't, my house, my rules. If someone asks me something on Twitter, I tell them the truth, because,
And Richard, in the last sort of 20, 30 years, have you seen a change in how atheism is perceived?
I'm not a sociologist. I haven't done the research. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not sure. It would only be a subjective impression. The statistics suggest that we're growing in numbers. Obviously in Western Europe, but also even in America, I think the number of people who claim no religion in the United States is now more than 20%, which is large compared to any particular religious denomination. So I think that the statistics show that the trend is in the right direction. But as Ricky says, other polls show that we're down there with rapists in terms of public...
I think they have to lump us in with, agnostics,
Richard Dawkins recalls Ricky Gervais on the radio. He was asked why he doesn't thank God for his success. Gervais replied simply, he doesn't believe. The word atheist exists because humans invented gods. Denying gods has always carried risk. Socrates was executed for impiety. Giordano Bruno burned for heresy. Apostates in Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Pakistan face imprisonment or death. Throughout history, disbelief has been treated as a threat to social and political order. Religious authority demanded obedience. Questioning it could cost life, liberty, or reputation. Atheists face suspicion even in modern societies. Early 2000s U.S. polls ranked atheists as the least trusted group, tied with rapists. Studies in Canada show non-religious candidates encounter barriers in elections. Secular populations rise steadily in Europe. In the United States, over 20% identify as nones. Sweden and the Netherlands, largely non-religious, lead global indices for education, equality, and well-being. Evidence, reason, and inquiry shape functional societies. Societies that reward critical thinking are more resilient, more equal, and capable of sustaining human rights. Religion did not build these societies. Human effort, courage, and skepticism did. Gervais stresses honesty as a moral principle. In his film, The Invention of Lying, he explores a society without falsehoods, showing that ethical life depends on truth. When faced with the fear of death, human imagination invents comforting stories. Gervais illustrates that myths are convenient, not necessary. He highlights the odds of any individual existing. 400 trillion to 1. Life is rare, brief, and astonishing. That reality does not require supernatural reassurance. It demands integrity, curiosity, and courage. Living fully means confronting reality without illusions, accepting death, and acting ethically because we understand consequences, not because a deity commands it. Dawkins notes that disbelief continues to grow. Skepticism spreads through dialogue, evidence, and observation. Gervais has faced criticism, hostility, and mistrust for stating his disbelief, including online attacks and social disapproval. Many still hide their lack of belief out of fear of ostracism. That fear is a legacy of centuries of religious authority. Despite that, more people now speak openly, examine claims, and reject inherited dogma. They engage in moral reasoning independently of supernatural authority. Gervais and Dawkins force a question society rarely asks. If stating disbelief provokes fear, what does that reveal about the authority religion claims? If morality, meaning, and wonder exist without gods, Why defend myths that historically constrained thought, punished dissent, and enforced obedience? Human honesty, inquiry, and courage have always expanded freedom. They remain the clearest guide forward. The challenge is personal and collective. It is not enough to live silently. Truth must be acknowledged. Human progress has always demanded courage, and that courage begins by questioning myths, facing the extraordinary odds of existence, and living with integrity. Belief cannot claim moral authority where honesty and reason prove stronger, richer, and more durable.
But then, you know, a lot of religious people are intelligent, but they've been got at an early age, and it's like, I think they're braver. Some people, there's still a thing of not saying I'm an atheist because people think that it's a bad thing to be. You know, parents still christen their kids instead of school because they think it's a respectable thing to do. You know, that's sad, but I get it. There's a couple though. There's a couple. They don't put it in their act, I don't think. Tim Vine is very devout Christian.
Yes, true. Yes. But in general, they tend to be, I think, more sceptical or...
I think that's because they look at things from all angles and they come up with funny ideas. And I look at the idea, and I think that's what's wrong, and that's what dogma does, is that people try and give ideas human rights, so you leave them alone. And you don't have to. You can ridicule ideas without hurting anyone. And some people say...
That deserves a round of applause.
Oh, thank you. And they found it shuts some people up. If they say that's hurt, you know, you can be accused of racism or anything if you criticize an idea, and it's people jumping in the way of a bullet and saying, "Why are you shooting at me?" And it comes back to Richard's point that I'm offended. That's not an argument. It's not an argument. It's like me being offended if someone takes the mickey out of maths. It's like, go on, yeah, fine, yeah. Do you know what I mean? You can laugh at maths. It doesn't affect maths. It doesn't affect maths.
And I'd like asking this of all performers. When you've done a lot of live work, when you go on stage or before you go on stage, do you have any superstitious rituals that you carry out?
No.
Really?
No, I'm not superstitious, am I? Is this a trick?
No.
If I said yes, I'd go down a vault.
Then look at this footage and deny it. No. Really.
No, I have. I probably have loads of sort of neuroses and OCDs and things like that, but nothing based on superstition. It's worrying that are the audience in? What's the air conditioning like? Is it like is there a squeaky door? No ice in the drink. Someone's putting off. There's someone. You know. I have all those things, but I have no superstitions. No. Did you mean superstitions, or do you mean?
Yeah, I mean some performers touch wood or wear certain socks or nothing.
Well, I wear the same clothes because I can't be bothered to think about what else to wear, but. No, I don't do touch wood.
Okay.
No, I don't touch wood. No.
I'd ask.
No, I don't. No. I burn some incense, say a couple of prayers. That's it, really.
And in terms of changing minds, in terms of getting people to be more skeptical or rational or scientific, both of you enormously influential, but with two different ways. Obviously, you're using comedy a lot of the time, and you're depending more on factual arguments. How does that play out? Is that playing to the same audiences? Do you think it's equally persuasive?
Well, I think Richard's more driven in his thing than I am. But what do you think about changing minds? What do you think?
I'm known to be not very good at it. I tend to just, as you were saying earlier, Ricky, I tend to just tell the truth. And that isn't always the right way to go about it. Marketing wouldn't approve, I suspect, of just simply going out and telling the truth. I had a rather nice encounter with Neil deGrasse Tyson, who said something like, you just put it out there. You don't. There's no act of persuasion. There's no act of seduction going on. You just simply say, here are the facts. Take it or leave it. And I had to say, I said I gratefully accept the rebuke. But I then went on to say I'm not the worst of that. And I quoted Alan Anderson, who was then the editor of New Scientist, who said, I asked him what your policy is at New Scientist, and he said, our policy at New Scientist is science is interesting, and if you don't agree, you can fuck off.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly, yeah. Yeah, in the greater scheme of things, there are probably worse things than people believing in all the different gods. It doesn't affect me because I'm free and liberated and safe, and but yeah, you can still be annoyed. It's ignorance that annoys me more than anything. Whatever it is, it's not. I don't want to keep going after religion because that's only one form of this belligerent, willful, and it's not even that. It's you can't sort of help what you believe in. Most people aren't going around thinking this will annoy people, or I'm trying to oppress people's rights. They just think, I believe in God because that's how my brain worked when I was little, and now I think, yeah, there's probably a God. And most religious people aren't crazy. It's something else. Again, it's something, you know, we worry about the people who believe the bad bits in their holy book as well as the good bits. Most nice people who believe in God, they can tell the difference. They know the nice bits, they cherry pick and they know the nice bits from the bad bits. They don't do the bad bits. And my point is, if you know the bad bits from the good bits, you don't need the holy book. You know, you're already a moral person.
And with Afterlife, which I think is phenomenal.
Thank you.
Clearly, obviously you talk about atheism in there, but it's fundamentally about kindness and living a good life, I think.
I think it is. I think the question is, when you lose the best thing about life, is it still worth living? That's what the question starts with. It started with a high concept, really. Imagine you lost everything. You wouldn't care about anything. You could do what you wanted. So that was the comedic, dramatic.
Where did that thought come from?
I don't know. I think it might have been sort of 2 years of this thing that you got to watch what you say. Like it wasn't to say the right thing, it was to say the thing that was least offensive to most people, which is nonsense. We'd still be in the Middle Ages. We'd still be putting leeches down our pants, you know. Every scientist committed heresy at some point. Every great invention, every move forward in progress was going against some sort of crazy dogma at some point. And it wasn't that there was more crazy, mad, nasty people around. It was that they weren't ashamed of it anymore in the last few years. You know, in my day, racists were ashamed, right? Now they're not. Right? So, and the backlash was people saying, "Oh, you can't say anything," and I just thought, well, imagine if you could. You just could. You didn't care about the consequences. You didn't care about offending anyone, because that we do. We even myself and Richard, who want to tell the truth, we do things we don't want to do all the time because we're worried about it. If we're mugged, we hand over the cash because we don't want to get hurt, right? But imagine if you didn't care about living or dying. That happens in Afterlife. You think, bring it on. I'm not scared anymore. So that was the idea. If you weren't scared about consequences, if you weren't scared about politeness, if you had nothing to lose. And that was the seed of the idea, really.
But then, of course, it becomes about kindness. It becomes about overcoming that. It becomes
about people
feeling.
trying to save you, the comfort of strangers and the people who care. And that's the thing about grieving and depression. The thing that came out of Afterlife that shocked me, I've never had a reaction like it. Even the office, I've never had a reaction like it, because it was an emotional reaction. And I found out that people come up to me all the time and they say, oh, I lost my mother, I lost my husband. And you think, oh yeah, of course, everyone's grieving. Everyone's grieving this year about something. And the older they get, the more that happens. And that was never an intention, but I think people hadn't seen, certainly a comedy, but they hadn't seen something that dealt with grief. That man who was just, he wanted to die, and then I had to make it funny. So, but yeah.
But also this character is dealing with grief not from a religious point of view at all.
Well, I wanted that. I wanted a bit of a play on words with Afterlife, like he thought his life was over.
Ricky Gervais points out that intelligence doesn't automatically lead to belief. Many religious people are taught faith from childhood. Baptism, prayers, and religious instruction are presented as normal, even essential. Declaring disbelief can provoke tension, disapproval, or social isolation. Gervais notes that identifying as atheist requires courage because it challenges long-standing expectations and traditions. He emphasizes skepticism as a way to examine the world. Humor and critical thinking allow people to question ideas without harming others. Dogma treats beliefs as untouchable, discouraging investigation. Criticism is not personal attack. It's a way to test ideas. Richard Dawkins echoes this. Facts exist independently of feelings or offense. Understanding requires evidence, not comfort. Gervais also rejects superstition. Performers may have routines, anxieties, or habits, but he avoids rituals or charms. Outcomes depend on preparation, skill, and observation, not invisible forces. Belief in supernatural influence is unnecessary for navigating life. Both speakers address society's perception of atheism. Dawkins cites surveys that rank atheists as untrustworthy. Gervais notes that many conceal disbelief to avoid criticism. Historically, religious authorities equated morality with faith, yet secular reasoning shows ethics do not require belief in a deity. Humans make moral choices, show compassion, and respond to grief without scripture. Gervais' work in Afterlife and The Office reflects this. Characters confront grief, loss, and mortality without invoking God. Humor and observation allow audiences to engage honestly with life's difficulties. Moral action emerges from empathy, reflection, and human connection. Dogma often restricts thought and discourages questioning. Life gains meaning through conscious action, ethical reflection, and awareness of consequences. Honesty, curiosity, and courage guide individuals in facing reality, making moral decisions, and navigating loss. Belief is not a prerequisite for morality or for living a full life. How do you see it? Do you think religion shapes morality, or can we develop ethics and compassion on our own? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this got you ideas, be sure to like, subscribe, and share to keep the conversation going.